gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us for a very important conversation and discussion this evening. Once again, for the second time, we are extremely honored to host a panel of two of the people who are most influential about the Middle East and policy. One because he's at the center of events, and one because his commentary on the Middle East is read throughout the world and influences the influencers. To my immediate left is Jason Greenblatt. As the Special Assistant to the President of the United States for International Negotiations, he serves as the Chief Middle East Negotiator for the United States of America and as the Middle East Envoy. You have all seen him in the news repeatedly, especially over the last few weeks, because of the announcement that next week the United States will be hosting an economic summit. I think they're calling it a workshop in Bahrain. We were always debating whether we should call it Bahrain or Bahrain. But that's going to be taking place next week, and Jason has been instrumental in organizing that conference. That will, of course, serve as the pretext for tonight's conversation, now that the beginning, I guess, of the Trump peace plan is so imminent. He has been at the president's side for more than 2 decades as his attorney at the Trump organization, and he has the president's ear. And if you get to know Jason as a person, you'll understand why. He is a very unique and special man, and I thank you for your devoted service to the United States of America, and God bless you. Thank you. More to my left, although that is not a political statement, but one of just geography, is my very dear friend, Bret Stephens. I could go on about Bret. He has asked me to keep it very short, so I will do so simply by saying Bret is universally recognized for being one of the finest writers in America today. Israel has few defenders who are as eloquent. Like Jason, Bret is a family man. He's extremely devoted to his 3 children, and Jason is devoted to his 6. But he cheated. He has triplets. So two very devoted family men. I can personally attest to what a loyal and amazing friend Bret is. What a man of integrity and righteousness and goodness. Because he has his critics, and I have probably a lot more. I find it amazing when people speak about Bret Stephens and his convictions, when I know him to be a man of supreme conviction, who has always followed his convictions. And his convictions lead him to write the columns that he writes every single week, whether I agree with him fully or if I don't agree with him. Bret, this is a democracy, he has the right to be wrong. But I read Bret religiously, and I'm always amazed at his capacity to articulate thought. His mastery of language is really second to none. As you well know, he's the Pulitzer-Prize winning columnist in the New York Times. He is here, as he often is at our organization, almost always, without any kind of compensation whatsoever. He does this as a public service. It's a night away from his family, and it's his sign of friendship to me and to our organization and to the values that we stand for, and we're very honored to have you, and God bless you. Thank you very much. So, Jason, you've really been in the news lately. Yesterday, you spoke at the Jerusalem Post conference. You confirmed what Ambassador David Friedman said, that Israel has a right to retain West Bank settlements in Judea and Samaria. You reconfirmed that, but that's not a big departure from even the Obama administration, because even when President Obama gave his famous speech, some would say infamous speech at AIPAC, where he spoke about the Green Line, Israel returning to the Green Line, even then he spoke about land swaps. So even he acknowledged that Israel would retain some of the settlements. What's also happened recently is that you've announced this economic conference in Bahrain, which is I think next Tuesday, beginning next Tuesday?
Tuesday night, yes.
And the big news today is that Israel is not invited to that conference. And the reason given, as I understand it from the White House, is because the purpose of the conference is to be apolitical, to focus almost exclusively on economics. But we still have to get to, well, Israel has a minister who deals with economics. Why is Israel not going to be there? The Palestinians have already announced they're boycotting the conference. Some of the other recent developments are that Israel yesterday both announced a new town, it will eventually be a town, called Ramat Trump, to thank the president for his recognition of the Golan Heights, etc. And tensions with Iran are really escalating. Amidst all of that, and the Palestinians' refusal to even attend your conference, you're forging ahead. You have been extremely articulate and powerful and persuasive, especially through your social media feed, about the need for the United States to push for peace. So let me begin by asking you, why an economic summit? Why that first? And what are its prospects for any kind of success if both the Palestinians and the Israelis are not there? You've said many times from even this chair that the one thing this administration would not do was impose a plan upon the respective parties that was not bilateral, that was not from them. But here they're not even going to be there to talk.
So I think the last comment is probably where I want to start. You're right, we have always said, I've certainly said, we're not going to impose a plan. No one can impose a plan, by the way, not the United States, not the United Nations, no matter what any country or group of countries think that they can come out with resolutions or statements against one party or the other. Nobody could force a peace plan. The parties have to want it, the parties have to be willing to compromise to achieve one. The reason we're starting with the economics first is twofold. One, this is a very detailed peace vision. You cannot have a successful peace agreement without a successful economic plan, which means we're worried about the day after, the weeks after, the months after, and the years after. We don't want to set up a political plan only to find out that it fails, and we would put the region into a worse position than the position that it is in now. We could do it all at once, but if we did it all at once, it would be a great deal of information for people to digest, and we felt the best thing to do would start with the economics, let the Palestinians understand, and by the way, there's some benefits for Jordan and Egypt as well, let the region understand the many great things that can happen for the Palestinian people from this economic plan if we also achieve a political plan, a political agreement, if you will. In a perfect world, we would have released the political vision shortly after the economic vision. We had an event in Israel a couple of weeks ago. They were not able to form a government. There's now new elections, and we'll have to make a decision after the Bahrain workshop as to when we will release the plan. If we decide not to release it during the election and government coalition formation, we may be kicked all the way to November. November 6th or so is the last day of the new government formation if it takes the entire period of time. That is unfortunate, but as I said yesterday at J-Post, thank God that Israel is a democracy. So I'd rather put up with that inconvenience than anything else.
Well, let me ask you, how do you feel about the announcement that neither Israel nor the Palestinians are going to be at this workshop in Bahrain next week?
Look, the fundamental problem that Israel faces is that you have a Palestinian leadership today that is unwilling or unable to come to terms with the idea of peace with its Jewish neighbor in almost any conceivable scenario. So while I think that there's a merit in having a plan that begins with an economic vision and proceeds to a political one, the predicate still isn't there, which is that neither on the side of Fatah, much less on the side of Hamas, is there any sort of willingness to participate in either of it. I mean, look, both aspects, both sides of the Palestinian leadership are participating really almost deliberately in the immiseration and impoverishment of their own people. So we're dealing with, you're offering an economic vision to turn these countries into, a Dubai, an Abu Dhabi, whatever it might be. But their vision is something completely different. And we saw that plainly with the uprising of Gazans just a couple of months ago, rebelling against a Hamas authority that is enriching itself off of the misery of their people. Who are the richest people in the West Bank? I would imagine they're the people who are connected to current centers of power within Fatah. So an economic vision isn't necessarily in their interests either. Look, what has to begin before a political plan, before an economic plan, is that the administration, and not just the Trump administration, but all Western leaders need to start speaking the truth to the Palestinian people. Number one, you will never destroy Israel, and we will never let you do it. Number two, if you want a state, prove to us that you're worthy of having a state, that a Palestinian state will be an asset in the community of civilized nations and not a liability. Number three, demonstrate in some meaningful way that you're capable of governing yourselves. So far, you're not. And number four, do not have as quasi-legitimate political authorities groups that are sworn to their neighbor's destruction and committed to terrorism as a form of political end-seeking. So all of those sort of come before the question of, what you might offer the Palestinians. If Palestinian leadership were genuinely interested in economic betterment, they would have gone for it a long time ago. There's a reason they haven't gone for it, because they see their vision of attaining power as a combination of the repression of their own people and a kind of glory seeking in the international arena, which depends on the perception that the Palestinians are the most miserable people on earth.
You are one of the most active people in the administration on social media, maybe second only to the president himself. And I think the most persuasive things you've been writing, actually, is how humiliating and insulting it is to the Palestinian people, who are extremely capable, very well educated, to be continually reliant on international subsidies. And you've been writing about how there has to be greater entrepreneurship, et cetera. But Bret's responses, they've shown little interest in that kind of economic development. And everyone knows Hamas has utterly abused the international aid that they've received, which per capita is higher than the Marshall Plan. Why does the administration believe, Jason, that an economic summit is the way to go, that you'll somehow entice the Palestinians to a peace agreement? And we don't know what that peace agreement is yet. Bret is alluding to a Palestinian state. We don't know what's in the peace plan. I don't even know how many people know what's in the peace plan. I'm assuming 5 or 6 people on earth know what's in this peace plan.
Do you know what's in the peace plan?
I helped write it, yes.
So let's deal with some of what Bret said. Why do you believe that an economic workshop is the way to begin?
Yeah, if you don't mind, there's a few things I want to kind of go in orders. First of all, Bret's obviously not just a great writer, but a great speaker. And there's very little that he said that I would disagree with. In fact, I'd agree with just about everything that he said. I do want to point out one thing about the difference between Gaza and the West Bank. Very few people understand just how bad Hamas is to its people, to the 2 million Palestinians there. And when people throw out terms like, this isn't you, but the traditional thinkers, two-state solution, it's so simple, if you just say that, all will be good. They don't realize that 2 million Palestinians are suffering and subject to the rule of a brutal dictatorship in Hamas, and therefore it's much more complicated than people think. As far as the order of things, we could have picked different orders. We could have released a political plan. We could have tried to get the Palestinian Authority to do all the things you said that are completely legitimate and appropriate. We didn't. One of my biggest disappointments, and I have many in this job, is that we were not even able to get the Palestinian Authority to stop paying terrorists for killing Israelis. Now, thankfully, Lindsey Graham and others helped fix that problem by passing the Taylor Force Act. But we have been pushing all the things that you're pointing out. We've not succeeded, and what we've decided to do is break apart the audience. We can keep preaching to the Palestinian Authority and go nowhere, or we can speak to the people directly. And what we're saying to the people directly, and the feedback we're getting from working Palestinians has been very positive, is here are the many things that you will be able to benefit from if we could reach a peace agreement. It's not take this money and give up your rights or your thoughts or your dreams or your aspirations, however you want to describe them, but it's if your leadership is willing to compromise and create a deal that makes sense for them, that makes sense for Israel, that keeps Israel secure, that creates a Palestinian leadership that's responsible in all the ways that you describe it, this is what's waiting for you. But if we can't, then this economic plan will not see the light of day. No one will donate or invest in a Palestinian government or Palestinian people under the current circumstances. So we chose to do it this way to reach the people, to make them understand what could be, but I have no problem admitting that it may go nowhere if we get to none of the important things that you're calling out.
Well, just to jump in here. So Jason, this is the first on the record conversation you're having with us here, which I greatly appreciate, and it's a week before the meeting begins, so it's appropriate. So you're saying the reason why that there is an economic summit first is to really circumvent the Palestinian leadership, to try to reach the people, because you believe that while the leadership may be obstinate, while they may be putting politics or hatred of Israel or whatever the reason for their obstinacy is, they're putting it before the interests and the needs of the people. You believe the people really want a better economic life. They want a better education for their children, better schools, better hospitals, better roads. And if you're able to show that, you can circumvent the Palestinian leadership, meaning it's not even that important that the Palestinian leadership are going to be absent from the conference, because you think this is going to trickle down to the people. How are they going to make their will known? How are they going to make it known that they want to see this happen?
First of all, we use the word workshop, not summit, and not conference intentionally. We're going to air ideas, and we're going to want feedback from the audience. It would have been great if the Palestinian leadership showed up to give feedback. Instead, they not only chose to boycott it, they chose to try to undermine it by telling everybody else not to attend, or to lower the level of attendance at the event. How does that help the Palestinian people? That's terrible for the Palestinian people. We're not exactly trying to circumvent it. I would use a different way to describe it. I would say we want the people to understand what awaits them, so we want the message to get out there. We don't have a good media environment there. We can't do the same kind of interviews that we can. We don't get the same kind of stories in the Palestinian media that we do elsewhere, because the media is a tightly controlled environment. You're right in saying I'm active on social media. One of the pieces that's missing from my social media is a description of the many, many meetings I have with Palestinians all the time, who sit in my office or in Jerusalem or anywhere else I meet them, where they explain to us that they are thirsting for those things that you described, the infrastructure and everything else, not at the expense of the things they dream about. They do want their state, meaning these Palestinians who sit with me don't say, just give me money and I'll be fine. They want a state, they talk about East Jerusalem, they talk about all the things you would expect them to say.
Actually, the only functioning democracy you have in the Middle East is Iraq. Something that people rarely point out, but that's also true.
You would call Iraq a functioning democracy?
Well, it is, yeah. I mean, they have prime minister, they have a parliament, they have institutions of state. So people stop noticing but this is a whole different discussion. Look, I mean, I am with Jason in believing that there's tremendous amount of possibility in the Palestinian people. And I certainly spent a lot of time talking to ordinary Palestinians in my own journalistic life and seeing people who wanted a better future for themselves and their families than the ones that they were likely to have. That's a tragedy for them. It has to be pointed out that the principal reason that they're not achieving that is because they have leadership that wants to deny them many of the things they aspire to, peaceful and more prosperous lives. But it's very difficult for the United States or any outside party to dictate the kind of politics that are going to emerge out of out of their societies. The Bush administration tried that with the democracy agenda, and unfortunately, one of the patterns that you see emerge in the Middle East is that in order to achieve kind of social opening, you need autocracy, and when you choose democracy, what you end up with are socially repressive political parties. That is to say, since you mentioned Mohamed Morsi, he was the result of the one free and fair election that Egypt has had in modern memory, elected a Muslim Brotherhood leader. In Turkey, at least until recently, Erdogan was the popularly elected leader. He's essentially another Muslim brother. So you have this kind of toxic dynamic in which when you choose a democratic path, you end up with socially repressive parties that are also ultimately autocratic. And if you want to achieve greater social openings, the only people who have historically been prepared to do that are people like the Shah of Iran or Ataturk, or in his own fashion, Mohammed bin Salman, all of whom have used autocratic and often despotic and brutal methods to achieve those aims. So that's a kind of a dynamic that we've seen in Middle Eastern politics for a long time. I don't know how this, or frankly any administration, breaks away from it, which is why I think it's so important to get away from trying to lay down plans or bring parties together or create workshops or whatever you want to call them, and simply to lay out consistent principles that might lead to the creation of some kind of Palestinian state, or what Benny Gantz calls an independency, at some point in the future. I really think that rhetorical footwork is every bit as important, if not more important, than sort of the behind-the-scenes diplomatic work that one administration after another, Democratic and Republican, has tried to undertake almost every single time with, frankly, dismal results. I hope yours are more successful.
I thought that President Trump did not get enough credit, if I may say so, when he turned down Kim Jong-un at the second summit, because he could have eased sanctions a little bit and gotten a lot of credit for having made progress instead of it being a wasted summit or a failed summit. Instead, he said, without unconditional denuclearization, there will not be any easing of the sanctions. And Kim Jong-un went nuts and maybe even assassinated most of his negotiators 2 weeks ago. But that was a very strong statement on the part of the president that without full denuclearization, there will not be any easing of sanctions. So you want to see something similar when it comes to the Middle East?
Sorry, hang on a second, okay. I'm sorry I'm going to say this, Jason. I think the president's policy towards North Korea is a disgrace. I think saying that he accepts Kim Jong-un's word that that Kim knew nothing about the murder of Otto Warmbier is a disgrace. Otto Warmbier is an American citizen who was murdered by the Kim regime. I think saying that he exchanges beautiful love letters with Kim Jong-un, who's the most repressive dictator in the world, is a disgrace. I think it was an epic mistake to go and dignify someone like Kim with not one, but with two summits. I think it is very unfortunate and extremely dangerous that we are downgrading our military relations with our oldest and one of our most reliable democratic allies in the region, South Korea, by way of apparently appeasing the Kim regime. And maybe the president is conducting some form of four-dimensional chess. I don't know. Maybe he's the Gary Kasparov I've never met. But I think that the North Korea policy is one of the reasons why, sorry, I'm not on the Trump train. I could name many other reasons.
Israel has the right to retain West Bank settlements, or some people would refer to it as communities in Judea and Samaria, the ancient biblical lands of Judea and Samaria. So let's talk about that for a moment. I respectffully disagree with my very dear friend Bret Stephens. I'm opposed to a Palestinian state because even if it were like Costa Rica, and by the way, I'm not sure Costa Rica doesn't have an army. Aren't they militarized? They have no army? That's amazing. Why don't we all live in Costa Rica? That's so pretty. I saw real red parrots flying all around at Corcovado National Park. So
That was the Army.
Air Force. I just don't. I'm not even sure there's enough land for the creation of a Palestinian state. We did this ad in the New York Times, a newspaper well known to my friend Bret. This was an ad that we did in the New York Times 10 days ago. Full page ad. Rashida Tlaib had spoken of, we wanted to be fair to her. She kept on saying she was misquoted. So rarely do you see this. We put the entire quotation is about how we celebrated the Holocaust and the calming feeling the Holocaust gives. We put the entire quote. So she could not say that we quoted her out of context. One of the main things we wanted to show was that when she mentioned that the Jews had been welcomed to British-mandated Palestine, we showed precisely the opposite was true. It was pogroms, it was mass murder, it was riots that caused Britain, and even a friend like Winston Churchill, and one of the best columns you wrote this year was that review of Andrew Roberts' book on Churchill. Even a great Zionist like Churchill to close the gates of Palestine because of all the Arab pressure.
The lack of peace has nothing to do with the existence of settlements, no matter what people say, day in and day out. And the other thing I would point out is 242, well, first of all, we were left with a terrible resolution when the Obama administration left. Just weeks before the president was inaugurated, we were left with this terrible resolution. But 242, I think any intellectually honest person has to believe that it is interpreted differently by different people. For people to suggest that 242 requires an absolute withdrawal to the 67 lines, which is the interpretation or the talking point of Saeb Erekat, That is not what 242 says, and people ought to be taking a closer look at 242. Beyond that, I'll end, and we can have a private conversation about your other question.
You can think of all kinds of small countries which have been able to do a great deal by relying on the ingenuity of their own people rather than looking for natural resources or whatever. And until recently, Hong Kong was an example of that. Singapore is a terrific example of that. There are all sorts of little countries in Europe that are doing just fine, thank you, because they're not committed to warring on their neighbors. They're committed to using human capital for the betterment of their people. And that's what's going to happen at some point or other with the Palestinians, whether they get the memo tomorrow or, long after we're all gone. I don't know.
So first of all, I agree with Bret that the focus is Iran. Iran is a threat to our allies in the Middle East, ourselves, the Europeans, no matter if people disagree with the president's approach in Europe. They're a significant threat, and that has to be the absolute focus. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, resolving it, it's a hope, a dream, an aspiration. But to get to your point about doing it during an election cycle, if Bret is right and it's 0%, we'll know that quickly, and then we don't have to worry about your question. It's sort of a moot question if he's right. If he's wrong, though, and I'm not saying he's wrong, but if he's wrong, I look at things as a dad. I have 6 kids, ages 8 to 20. I would hate to tell these Palestinians that I speak to all the time that they have to wait, that their dreams have to wait. Because if we could actually help them achieve their dreams, even during an election cycle, I think we owe it to them to do that. So we'll find out pretty quickly, and then we'll see. But I think that this president has a unique ability to handle complex tasks at the same time with a very strong national security team, very strong leader in Secretary Pompeo, lots of very talented and smart people in the administration who can help us get through this if we're lucky enough to get there.
So you see the president being fully engaged in this peace process and this peace plan, even in the midst of a turbulent election cycle?
If it gets off the ground, meaning we may not get off the ground. Again, I'm not challenging Bret 0%, but if we're lucky enough to get off the ground, I think everybody deserves us moving it forward.
But the problem with all the Israeli-Palestinian wars, when we wish there were no wars, and that's why I so endorse everything Jason is doing, I completely endorse it. And I'm so grateful for your time, and not just coming here, of course, but all your efforts. You are pursuing something that is very, very hard, and you're doing it, and it's very important. But these wars are always stopped short, Bret, and the Palestinians never get the message, or Hamas never gets the message, that the military option is just is not going to happen. Israel is always stopped after 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Now, I don't want to complain about that because I have children who served in the IDF. I don't want to see any war. When you become a parent of a soldier, it changes your perspective completely. But the Palestinians still believe that the military option is the one by which to defeat Israel, which is why Hezbollah has 100,000 missiles in southern Lebanon. It's why Hamas has, we don't even know how many missiles in Gaza. They still believe that the armed struggle is the way to achieve things, as opposed to what you're trying to achieve next week, Jason, which is economics. Build Google. Build great roads. So do you not believe that something like that has to happen for them to get the message that the military option is closed forever in order for there to be a Costa Rica, which is, as a Palestinian
what you're
state?
saying, if I can summarize your question, is will Palestinians ever change unless you have a Hiroshima in Gaza, right?
No, I don't want to say Hiroshima. I want to
Okay.
be clear that I'm not speaking about
an
that.
epic military defeat of the
Well, a
Palestinians.
defeat where they understand that they're never going to win in a military struggle.
Well, look, let me revise.
Like the Six-Day War.
Let me revise the answer I gave about the question, your question about the chances of Jason's efforts succeeding. I don't want to say 0%. Okay, I think they're low. But you can't give up hope, and I don't think that there's anything the matter with setting out aspirations. And I think it's always a good idea to keep a sense of hope about human possibility and about generations understanding the mistakes of the generations that preceded them. And my hope is that Palestinians, younger Palestinians, will grow at some point, I don't know when, weary of the sterile politics of Arafatism and of Hamas. And there are examples all around. Many Palestinians live here in the United States, or they live abroad, or they travel to Abu Dhabi, and they must, I'm sure they are asking themselves perfectly pragmatic questions. Why do we have to constantly live in a state of endless antagonism with our neighbors? Is there not a better way? And at some point, those questions are bound to percolate. At some point, they're bound to gain some kind of traction. You saw it in those brave Palestinians standing up against Hamas, not Israel, but against Hamas in recent protests. And to the extent, maybe I've been too negative, to the extent that Jason and his team are talking to those Palestinians, encouraging them, creating at some point a political base for change, for genuine renewal, for genuine progress, then I think they're doing important work, even if it doesn't yield a result in the short term. I don't think you should ever write off whole groups of people under any circumstances as saying sort of, beyond hope, irredeemable, and so on. I think it's a terrible way to approach people. I think it's morally upsetting, and I don't think it serves any good purpose at the end of the day. We should say to the Palestinians, we wish you well, here are our expectations, we hope you meet them.
Well, I have to say, it's like we've come full circle because we're all really in agreement, right? Number one, that Jason's efforts are extremely important. We thank you for the way you represent the United States. Jason, with you. We thank you for the humility with which you go about your responsibilities. Just everyone give me a moment, please. We thank you for your dedication. You're an Orthodox Jew, so you spend the week away from your family. Sometimes you get to go home for Shabbos. I know the sacrifices that you make on a government salary, et cetera, et cetera. And I, as an American Jew who believes in everything that Bret just articulated so eloquently about the aspirations for peace and the value and dignity of human life, et cetera, I salute your efforts. I also want you to please communicate on our behalf. We're not a political organization, we're a values organization, but you will please communicate to the President of the United States our deep appreciation to him for his stalwart support of the world's only Jewish state, his repeated defenses of Jews amidst these terrible attacks against our people, his the kind of time that he dedicated even in his State of the Union address to condemning anti-Semitism. People mention Charlottesville. They don't mention how much the president has done since Charlottesville. Just astonishing, and how he has shown himself to be with us, with the Jewish community worldwide, in defending Jewish life, defending Jewish rights, and defending us against the anti-Semites. And what he's done for Israel really is unprecedented, and I want the president to know that it's deeply appreciated. And that's not a political statement. This is a statement of American Jews to the president of this country for everything he does for us. And thank you for being part of that administration. And Jason, thank you for your time. We're very grateful. Thank you. And to my dear friend Bret Stephens, I think you all saw tonight why Jason has been chosen to lead these negotiations, because of how disarming he is, and how it's amazing, no matter how much this is such a protracted conflict, no one has anything bad to say about Jason, even on the other side, with the exception of real extremist haters. But he's very respected in the Arab world, very respected in the Jewish world, and the Israeli world. But to my friend Bret Stephens, I want to thank you personally for the phenomenal eloquence you bring to bear on defending Israel and Israel's good name. We Jews have been terrible at two things for the past millennia. One is sports, with the exception of yours truly, and the second is public relations. We have just not found the words how to articulate our values, defend ourselves, and then God gave you this phenomenal gift, and you have deployed it so effectively in defense of your people, in the world's most respected organization. And I know that your father, who is looking down at us from heaven, and your mother, who, thank God, is with us right here on earth, I know the tremendous pride that they take in seeing a son who has risen to those kinds of heights, to take a very maligned people who've tried to do the right thing for the past few thousand years and have really been defamed. To have a defender of your caliber is such a rarity, and we all show you affection, appreciation, and tremendous respect for it. And God bless you all. Thank you all very much for coming.